I think it's a little, you may think it's a little strange, but it will all be revealed later. But I've got to tell you, I am very nervous now because a lot of people who know my subject far better than I do are in this audience. So forgive me if I make any mistakes. I'm still quite new at all of this, and it's all a new learning curve for me. As explaining earlier, geology is something that's always been in my background, but I'm an industrial historian. But I have started to get absolutely fascinated now by this. I'm going to just close that. There we go. So I don't know if you all know us or not, but the area in which we operate is right in the heart of the Midlands. And we operate across quite an extensive area, as you can see by this square. We do underground trips and we do above ground trips, but our core offer is underground. So you will be hard put to find us. And sadly, we are Dudley's best kept secret. We don't want to be Dudley's best kept secret. We want everybody to know about us. But when your main offer's underground, it can sometimes be a bit difficult. But if you want to visit us, we are right next door to the Black Country Living Museum. We spend our life going around telling people, no, we're not the Black Country Museum. And we do like to point out that we were there first. But as neighbours go, it's quite good being next door to them. We have a shared access point, and we do work in conjunction with all the other attractions in the area because we all have our own story to tell, but collectively we all have a bigger story to tell. And I think, Ray, you were talking about Dudley Castle earlier, and that's obviously something that we're keen to continue doing. So in terms of us, it is a very complicated story. We date back 428 million years, thereabouts. There's not many places with such long history as us. And we have so many stories to tell, and there are so many themes. Now, the word cloud on the screen just touches on some of them, and you may be surprised to see things like treason and war and anarchy, but I'm hoping my talk will show you why I've put those words in there. Because I'm sure you'll all want to get to your beds tonight, I'm not going to go through the whole of the 428 million years. I am going to touch on just 4 main points for us. The recognition of the Silurian period, the extraction industries and the Industrial Revolution, going to war, which for me is one of the most exciting bits of our history, and also the future. You know, it's very easy with historians to always be looking back, but we have got to be looking forward as well. We've managed to come through one of the most challenging years we've ever had. We want to make sure we're here for many more years. We've been operating over 55 years now, and we want to continue that. So the system, as we call it, and this is where I've stolen all of Graham's work so he can shout at me later, is the result of ground movement, which twisted and folded up and outcropped, particularly in our area, in 4 main places. But I believe this outcrop runs all the way from Scotland to Much Wenlock, coming up in various places. And our site is actually sat in the middle of the 4 that are in the Dudley area, in particular Wren's Nest and the area where we operate, which is Castle Mill. At Wren's Nest alone, there are numerous ripple beds, the sea beds that you can see there. And I always think I need to put a person in this picture because it never does it justice, just how towering and expansive some of these beds are. And they all, as geologists, must speak to you. They must tell you so many stories about what has gone on, the weather, how the ground has moved, what was living and not at the time. And it's something I really started to get very interested in. So I'm quite new to this. As I said, I'm not a geologist, but I can see the fascination most definitely. And the artist in me just absolutely loves the fossils and what has been left in evidence there. So the wren's nest is really, really a key part of our focus, and something that we're really keen to work with the likes of Graham and others on, because we just sit on the edge of that. But right from the very early period, the geological importance of the place was recognised. And I think it was in 1665 when the first geological map was produced of Castle Hill. And it's quite interesting because, again, Castle Hill at the moment, and particularly the castle, is being studied. So it keeps coming round, the importance and the finding of new information there. So many of the fossils that are found in the area were absolutely unique. And, I've just generalized the number there, but you can really see that it's quite extensive with the unique fossils which helped form the area and its knowledge. And the trilobite, or the Dudley bug, as we all affectionately call it, such an iconic fossil in the area, so much so it actually ended up on our coat of arms. So I think that really front and central, which I love. I absolutely love that idea. The importance of the area was recognised when it was declared first as a national nature reserve, then as a site of scientific and exceptional importance. And 2020, Graham, you finally succeeded in the UNESCO Black Country Geopark status, which, I can't tell you how excited everybody in the area is. And we're looking forward to working with the group on raising the profile of that. Now, with this abundance of the mineral-rich limestone, which was pushed up and then exposed, it's no surprise that it was soon being exploited. We know that mining was going on perhaps from around the Roman times, but it's the first and second Viscounts Dudley and Ward that we really see it growing on an industrial scale. And in many ways, this helped play its part in supporting, but also pushing forward the Industrial Revolution. Lots of places claim that they were the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution, but certainly without the development of the hot metal trades and the materials that were needed to run the furnaces, you would not have got anywhere like the sort of expansion that we did see. Now, the first Lord Ward inherited the Dudley estates in 1720 and later in 1740 with the death of his father and his cousin. And it was with the death of his cousin that this family line was suddenly raised in the peerage. He was never supposed to get to the level of Lord Ward, but it happened, and it was something that he therefore decided to invest in, really wanted to grow the family fortunes and the estate. But sadly for him, he actually only had the title for a short period. But in that period, he definitely looked at the estates, he looked at the resources, and he set out to use the coal seams that he had running under the ground, and certainly all the mineral rights. But he was first and foremost looking for a good marriage, and was looking for a very wealthy woman who could become his wife. Now, the land in the Black Country at the time, which he inherited, was considered the nation's most valuable mineral asset per acre due to a 10-yard seam of coal, as well as coal, brick clay and limestone stratas. And indeed, in his own letters, he claimed that he alone had coal sufficient to supply the markets for the coming 1,000 years. It's something I'd like to have a look into and see if that was actually a fact. But as I said, sadly, his social ambitions were thwarted when sadly he died in 1744. And his son, who the painting you can see on screen is, John, the second Viscount Dudley and Ward, began to escalate the plan that his father had set out to build the estates, to build the area, and to really make the most of all the resources that are in the lands that they owned, and also to raise his political profile. He really did want to be a big player in the world. He introduced enclosure acts in Dudley, and King Swynford, so he could build a vast portfolio of assets. Lord Ward actually did this later than many other areas, but he did it deliberately and with a view that he was going to get the most valuable areas and the most valuable underground minerals that were available. He also turned his attention to the limestone-rich lands at Wren's Nest and Castle Mill, and he used his influence well. He really did call on all businesses in the area. He called on the masons, he called on political allies, and he called on industry to really help him meet his aspirations. Sadly, however, the plan also to marry a rich wife, like his father, eluded him. So though his approach was really considered entrepreneurial at the time, he was ruthless in his aim. And a lot of the papers that I've read, people still 200 years after his death complain about his approach and some of the actions he take. He was described as charmless, graceless, and I hope I'm not saying anything rude here, a butcherly soaker, which I have no clue what that means, but it was definitely levelled at him by those who knew him. But you could complain about him, you could dislike his practices, but he really quickly established himself as the head of the region's industrial and commercial interests. He spoke in support of interests in Birmingham and the Black Country, and he promoted the building of turnpikes and canals. He sought out and brought in new trades to the area. He loaned money to developments and individuals to make sure they located in Dudley. He gave rents at much cheaper rates for the right people, and he really helped develop things like the glass trades, the turnpike trusts, and obviously the thing that we're most interested in on our site, the building of canals. Now, it was all really worthy, and he did patronise local good causes, but first and foremost, his aim was to build the Dudley and Lord Ward estates, and he was not apologetic in that, and he did not hide behind it. As I mentioned, the estates had great coal measures, but it was soon established that the limestone holdings yielded a material of superior quality, especially of a quality that was needed in the growing hot metal trades. The first mines of size that Lord Ward instigated are the caverns that we now take visitors through. So this is Castle Mill Mine and the associated outcrops from there. He also linked Kettle Mine, Tipton Mine, and later to Wren's Nest. Now, as rich as the Dudley estate was, it was landlocked. We have no rivers close by, and so getting materials in and especially out of the area to the market was problematical, costly, and very, very time consuming. And it could be a really protracted affair. And this was something that Lord Ward constantly saw held up his expansion. With the previous enclosure acts and his right to build roads over any land in the region, he was literally riding roughshod over everybody. He really did churn up the area, caused a lot of upset, and all at no cost to himself. But he knew that he could only do that for so long, and he knew that there had to be a better way of transport for him. And so the answer was seen to be the canals. With the introduction of the canal network, he was overjoyed when he heard about the Birmingham Canal navigation, which was being built. However, this joy was short-lived because it turned out that the branch of the canal was going to skirt his main works by 2 miles. Now, you wouldn't think 2 miles was very long, but back in the day, it might as well have been 100 miles as far as Lord Ward was concerned. And despite lobbying and despite offering money and financial support, he could not get the Birmingham Canal navigation to change its route. And so he decided to set up a business, the Dudley Canal Company, and build his own canal, which would link his mines with and his Bloomfield site with the Birmingham Canal navigation. As you can imagine, the Birmingham Canal Navigation were not happy about this, and they did everything that they could to prevent it. But Lord Ward would not take no for an answer, and so ploughed on. And this resulted in quite a long-standing grudge between the two companies, and both continued to do everything they could to make life difficult for each other. Despite all the issues, Lord Ward realised he had to bring a lot of the other miners and a lot of the other businesses on side, and so he started offering reduced carriage on his canals, and he started offering financial support to businesses along the route that wanted to expand. He was able to undercut the BCM profits by quite a lot, and it all got very, very nasty in the end. But Lord Ward's Canal, and you should all now be listening very carefully, because as entrepreneurial as Lord Ward was, and I like to think that we have been, creatively naming things is not our strong point. So Lord Ward's Canal, named after himself, was soon built, but during the build he had a brainwave that saw him decide to build a tunnel straight from his canal into his works, literally to the rock face, which he then flooded. And rather than bringing the coal up on wagons and then unloading it back onto boats, the coal and the limestone, he could take the boat literally to the source, have the boat loaded, and then get it underway very quickly. Whilst he was building this, he had a further brainwave, and in many cases, he actually sold the idea to his customers that it would be cheaper and better for them to bring their own boats and sail right into the limestone caverns and get their own boats loaded. They all believed that they were getting it at a much cheaper and quicker price, and for Lord Ward, it cut out a real big chunk of the work and made his profits larger. So it was a win-win for everyone. Lord Ward's tunnel was completed in 1778 with the tunnel that went straight into the side of Castle Hill. And it really worked well. The raw materials and its transport grew to an unprecedented level. And he was really able to expand and to get Dudley's limestone out, and he got the message out at the same time with it about its superior quality and how much in demand it was and how much could be produced. And soon the whole country was talking about this limestone, and everybody who had any kind of works were keen to get hold of it. But transport to the whole of the UK was still a problem for Lord Ward. And so in 1776, he heard of a petition to build a second canal on the far side of the town, which again came within a couple of miles of his mines. And again, he lobbied to try and get it closer, even paying out substantial sums for feasibility studies and for new designs. But it was all to no avail. And you'd think that he'd already had the answer once, he'd be able to do it again, which was to just build a new tunnel straight through to the works. But unfortunately, this tunnel needed to go straight under Castle Hill, which you can see from the images there. That is not insubstantial. Approaching the Dudley Canal Company after many different engineers and different canal companies, it was decided that the Dudley Canal Company, who was no longer a member of, would take over the building of the tunnel. The tunnel, he put forward, I can't remember off the top of my head how much money he put forward to make sure it happened, but if you were looking at the equivalent today, you're talking £250,000. He put forward this offer. He also offered to sell them his existing tunnel and canal, thus making the whole of the link up to the Birmingham Canal navigation much, much easier, or so it seemed on paper. And he left the Dudley Canal Company free to start building the tunnel, which was fraught with all sorts of issues. At this time, though, they brought on some of the best engineers, such as Dadford. Canal building was still really new, and canal building into unusual locations, such as under old limestone caverns and hills, was really something that people hadn't got a lot of experience about. And unfortunately, there were a number of faults made, and also the natural landscape caused numerous rock falls. One of the biggest issues was the tunnel wasn't straight, which, you know, you wouldn't think was too big a deal. But when you've got boats fully laden that weigh 2 to 4 tons that are 30 feet in length and have no means of moving other than lying on your back and walking the tunnel, any kind of bend can really hold you up and can cause big problems if you start rubbing up against the walls. But everyone continued, and the tunnel was indeed built. Unfortunately for Lord Ward, at the time that the tunnel was built, he had actually passed away, and the estate had been passed on to another cousin. But luckily for him, he was still as keen to grow the family's estates, and he was still keen on the developing industrialisation and also the use of all the resources on the estate. And so he carried on the works, and when the Dudley Tunnel was actually completed, I just need to check my slide to see when that was. So Lord Ward died in 1788, and the Dudley Tunnel unfortunately wasn't open until 1792. It was soon realised that Lord Ward had never actually been paid for the Dudley Tunnel and the canal, which he had agreed to. But the estate never bothered chasing the payment either, because with the link and also with the new mines and the new routes that they had opened up, and Castlemillar by now had become a basin and was a large terminus for all their works, they had free and easy passage to wherever they needed to go. This was far more valuable than any money that could have been handed over. And so they renamed the canals. Unfortunately, again, they weren't creative. So we now have the Dudley number 1 canal and the Dudley number 2 canal, and those names still exist today and are really well known, but it does get confusing when you're trying to do any kind of research. But today, the Dudley Tunnel is the second longest navigable tunnel in the UK. I keep threatening to go out and build an extension on it so it can be the first. But unfortunately, that's about 2,500 metres that we'd have to build. So I don't think I've quite got the budget for that. But we're very proud of it. Every month we take visitors on trips through the tunnel. Even at 4 miles an hour, which our boats are restricted to, it still takes about 2 hours to actually pass through. But our skippers have researched so much about the area and about the tunnels and the bricks. So it's really lovely. It's a great visit. I think it's probably one of my favourite trips that we do. Every brick in it is handmade. All of them were made by the tunnellers' wives and their children and themselves. So they are literally, everyone is unique. I am told that if you look very carefully in certain places, you can actually see initials on some of the bricks, but I'm not sure if that's not our skippers just winding me up. But I end up looking very, very closely when we go down there. But you can see from the canal map at the side just how many other areas were able to link to this new tunnel. And with the existing tunnel, Lord Ward's tunnel and the canal to the BCN, it really did revolutionise canal transport in the area. Suddenly, most of the UK was very available, albeit slowly available, because you'd never travel very fast anywhere on a canal, but it did make everything cheaper and easier to transport. And I think that is really quite a pivotal point, especially for the Industrial Revolution, being able to get those materials out. Now, William, the new Lord Ward, as I said, he still had plans to continue to develop the site and to grow the family's fortunes. And we really see the extraction industries going to a whole new level, but also canal technology. I mean, from Castlemill Mine alone, they were bringing out 75,000 tonnes of limestone a year. You can really see some fantastic examples of canal and tunnel building and technology at its very best in the area with everything that was going on. And the town of Dudley was really benefiting, albeit incidentally. You know, Lord Wards, all of them wanted the town to do well, but mostly because that thriving town was bringing industry and bringing focus onto themselves and their businesses. But it really was working very, very well for everybody. And the town was becoming, in some areas, fairly wealthy. As a transport hub, the Dudley Tunnel and its links really was able to revolutionise the extraction of the local mines, but also tolls were paid for everyone else who used them, and upwards of 41,000 boats a year were going through our tunnel. So those of you who've ever been stuck on the M6 and think it's bad, you can imagine what it was like being in a tunnel that was just short of 2 miles long, no lighting, no way of getting off the boat, and the barest of rations with you. Where the mines were too small to be worked by the estate, they rented these out. And one in particular was bringing in, from a shareholder, £1,500 per annum. If you looked at that in rent equivalent today, you're talking about £231,000. So you can imagine the level of limestone, coal and brick clay that was being brought out of that mine. And soon after, in 1805, a new tunnel was built which connected the system to Wren's Nest and to the substantial mines and works that were going on there. So it's no wonder that these tunnels soon became really backed up, especially, as I mentioned, the only way to travel through them was by legging. And that's literally laying on the roof of the boat and walking the boat out. And as I said, these boats can weigh between 2 and 4 tons when fully laden. To prevent water disappearing out of the BCN canal, they had insisted that underground locks were built in the Dudley Tunnel. Canals losing water is something that still is vitally important today, and every branch protects its water like you wouldn't believe. These underground locks had never been seen anywhere, and it's fair to say that right from the outset, they didn't work well, and the time it took to use them really propagated the traffic jams that you could see underground. So unfortunately, they were soon removed. And the estate employed professional leggers to try and keep the speed of the boats moving. Most of the leggers worked in pairs, and they would be paid by how many boats they were able to move in a day. But one young lad came along, a gentleman called Jack Wheeler, who decided he didn't want to share any of his hard-earned wages. And so he worked out a way that he could take boats through by legging on his own. He soon worked out that by stringing boats together, he could do one journey but actually complete more boats and get paid more. And he perfected the art so much that he was able to take 7 boats out at a time at his height. Now Jack's a real hero because he was still doing this well into his 70s when it was suggested that he retired. We still do legging on site today. On all of our trips, we always ask for volunteers, but we also have a legging challenge. So if any of you feel like getting competitive with each other, or if you want to try out your times against the firemen who won the last legging competition that we did, let us know. We're certainly a place that can help you with that. Now, as the businesses grew and the transport links were growing, so was the interest in geology in the area. Miners regularly smuggled fossils out to the nearby fossil shops to supplement their wages, and geologists came from far and wide to see the area for themselves. One of these was Sir Roderick Murchison, who'd been studying in Wales and the local areas, and who in 1839 produced his work, The Silurian System. In 1849, he returned to the estate to give a lecture on the fossils and the evidence for the work they'd found within our caverns. And I believe it was Dark Cavern where the lecture was held, which is one of the largest caverns, but as Graham mentioned earlier, sadly it is now filled in. And this area was so large, it held, they call it a bandstand, but actually I think it was just a stage area. And on the day of the lecture, there were thousands of lit tapers. Gas lights have been put in, especially to light up Sir Roderick Murchison. And it's believed about 15,000 people attended this talk, which is not insignificant. And I'm not sure they're all in there at the same time, but maybe Graham can tell us more at the end of my talk. Many see this as the start of tourism in the system, but we know people have been visiting for many years. The Viscounts Dudley and Ward had had many prestigious visitors to Himley Hall, their family seat, and they always insisted that they came on a tour through these amazing caverns. In 1799, Matthew Bolton was hoping to secure the Russian contract for the mint, and so he brought 2 boatloads of dignitaries from Birmingham, all Russian. They came in their boats. One of the boats actually towed a full orchestra who played background music for the entire journey, and then they went into the caverns where they were entertained with fireworks. Needless to say, they got the contract. Artists such as Turner and Rayner painted amazing views of the site. I have to say, very romanticized views of the site, but they are beautiful works of art. And it's even claimed that Tolkien was inspired by his wanderings in the area to base Goblin's Lair on Dark Cavern, and certainly Wren's Nest at times really resembles what you think Mordor would have looked like. And then just this week, we found out that Rick Stanton, who was one of the 2 main divers who coordinated the Thai cave rescue, he'd been a fireman in the area for many years. And in his book that's coming out in the next day or 2, he talks about the fact that he would regularly go into Singing Cavern and practice his cave swimming and also cave climbing. So it'd be great to try and get in touch with him and see if he would come back. As well as dignitaries, there were organised steam packet trips from Birmingham. We've got some adverts for them. They ran every Saturday, and guests could attend the fetes and fairs which were held in the caverns. This included tours, music and spectacular fireworks and explosion acts. It's not something I would like to encounter these days. It's all great stuff, but you have to remember that these were still also working mines. So it's a good thing that TripAdvisor was not around. And I have seen a genuine note by someone who'd come on one of the trips, and she was complaining how coarse the men had been on the boats, and that she thought it was totally unnecessary that the miners were stripped naked to the waist. Not the sort of trip she was expecting at all. Despite all this activity, however, and visits from royalty, and we were really pleased in 2016 when Princess Anne came and reopened our caverns for us. Sadly, this was the period when you also start to see the decline. Much of the mining was now taking place at Wren's Nest and further afield, and only small independent miners were still leasing rock faces in the caverns, such as Hurst Cavern, and tourism was certainly dwindling. And by 1917, there was little or no activity, and the site was sadly abandoned. So by 1960, outwardly, it was believed that the area had long been forgotten, reclaimed by nature, and served no purpose. And so British Waterways put in plans to close the place and to infill the canal. They claimed the caverns were in a perilous state, that the tunnels had collapsed, and even though a train line ran across the top of them, that the area was so compromised as to be completely dangerous and polluted. Thinking it was a done deal, they delivered their report and put plans in place to say goodbye to Dudley Canal and Caverns. Closure notices were nailed up across all of the entrances to the site, and plans were put in place to start the closure. But the canals and caverns were actually a much loved and much used play area for the local youth of Dudley. and they were not willing to give up a place. They recognised its uniqueness and historic importance, plus many a beautiful romance that had been forged on dates in this magical underground, where abandoned boats could be easily captured and candles and torches provided an amazing tour, and a cosy tour at that. One of these kids, a 15-year-old called Cliff Sherwood, you can see him in the top left corner with his hand raised high, decided to do something about it. And so he wrote a message and put it in a bottle and placed it on a prominent shelf in the caverns. And he urged all the other gangs that he knew that were using the caverns to help him and to step forward and to try and stop the closure notice. I find it highly amusing that he was 14 or 15 at the time, and he suggested to everyone that they meet in the local gypsies' tent public house. But apparently the landlord was really accommodating and let them use the back room for meetings. So that was all working out very well for them. This group of kids started an ad hoc campaign. When the tunnels were boarded over, they ripped them down. When news put out there was a collapse, they grabbed a boat and sailed through to show that it was clear. They swam in the waters to prove that they were not polluted, and they took it in turns to disappear and hide in the tunnels when people were there doing work so that they couldn't be closed off. They made sure any attempt to close the caverns were thwarted, and they became such a force that the papers at the time dubbed them anarchistic teenagers, a title that they absolutely loved and that they embraced. And if you just look at, these are just a small example of the photos from our archives. They really were just kids. They spent their weekends clearing out rubbish, opening up the caverns and taking people on trips to see for themselves why it had to be saved. In turn, British Waterways did everything they could to close the site. An access bridge was in a dangerous state, but they could not fix it, saying that once it fell over, they would deal with it. So that night, after a few drinks at the gypsies' tent, Cliff and the boys laid on the ground and they pushed and they kicked and they worked away at that bridge, which was just a metal passenger bridge, until it did fall over and fall into the canal, thus making sure British Waterways had to repair it. The following week, work on a new bridge was started. Not long after, the group came to the tunnels to find an abandoned truck slowly sinking in the mud at Parkhead, right next to the entrance to the tunnel. Calling in favours and brute force, they managed to get it craned out, and they tell me that years later they met the man who confessed he had been paid to let the truck roll down the hill into the canal. Talking with one of the teenagers, he states that they went to war because that's what you did then. And it really was a war, and news soon got out about it. One of the people who'd heard about it was an apprentice mining surveyor called Vic Smallshire. Being in the area one day, he grabbed a dinghy, a flask of tea and a bike lamp, and he entered into the system. And it's fair to say he was blown away with what he found there. And finding the message in the bottle still sat on the shelf, he tracked down Cliff Sherwood and offered to join the group. At the same time, Inland Waterways, a Canal Preservation Society, were forming, and they too provided support and fighting spirits. Most of the tunnels and the caverns were being uncovered by the kids. And Vic Smallshire's sons told me a couple of weeks ago about they managed to get hold of some blasting powder. They weren't entirely sure how to use it, but it was quite a successful blast, and they did manage to get rid of one very large slab of limestone. And the only payback was that they couldn't hear for over a week, but they managed to get through it. Access to the system was via a range of different methods. You could go in by boat, you could crawl through tiny openings, shimmying down 50-foot, 50-degree limestone faces, or you could climb down rope ladders. None of it was for the faint-hearted, and I don't think there was any route into the caverns that this lot didn't find and explore. Rough maps and drawings of the system were sketched out and danger areas marked. If any of you have been on a trip with us, it's easy to lose sight of the fact that our cabins sit on an upper level, and there is at least one more level below us, in some places more than that. And to give you an idea of size, if you can see on this drawing here, Cavern 13 is our biggest cavern that we have got open to the public. That's Singing Cavern. During the recent laser scanning project we've just done, we have been able to fully confirm that in terms of size and scope, volume wise, it is equivalent to the dome of St. Paul's Cathedral. So this is not an insignificant cavern. But if you see behind it, number 8, that's Dark Cavern. So you can see how substantially much bigger it is than Singing Cavern. And that's where I believe Murchison held his lecture. We've got a whole range of different drawings of the caverns as they were found. It takes some interpreting, but if you take these drawings in with you, you can see actually how much detail these people were able to capture. At the time that the kids and Vic Smallshire and Inland Waterways were really picking up pace, the canals were in an incredibly sorry state. They'd become dumping places, they were overgrown. And as you can see from the picture, the bottom picture, you think that's a lovely field. That's actually the canal. That's the canal we operate on that's running right through the middle. In the middle ground, you can see the new bridge that had to get put back in place. And the large brick triangular building is actually where the portal entrance into Dudley into Lord Ward's tunnel is. And this is what the kids were faced with, and this is what the kids cleaned out. They gathered their resources, they got friends, family, volunteers, everyone that they could think of pitched in and really helped them, because it was really important that they got the canal to a navigable state. Rules with Canal and River Trust required that they would keep the canals and the waterways according to their classification. Commercial, obviously top priority, cruising for leisure and pleasure. Remainder canals do not require any investment and they don't do any work. So we had to make sure our canal sat in the cruising status. As in the spirit of Viscount Dudley and Lord Ward, the anarchistic teenagers refused to accept no as an answer. And if you talk with them, they'll tell you they did not have a cohesive plan, just passion and determination and enough youthful energy to carry them through. And it wasn't all hard work all of the time. They worked hard, but they also played hard. I swear they invented the rave because whole weekends would be spent underground, cooking on fires, listening to gramophone records. Cliff proposed to Barbara. She was the young girl looking adoringly at him in the previous photograph, and they soon got married. Her brother, caught in another young girl called Jean, swam the entire length of the Dudley Tunnel to prove he was man enough for her. That resulted in yet another wedding. Derek, a shy but dedicated youngster, saw Tina. She'd been taken in on the tunnel tour but on a dinghy by some local youth. Derek looked at her, liked the look of her, and so he used his superior Joey boat, similar to the boat you can see in the top picture, to sink the dinghy. He rescued the female, but he left the young lad in the water, wet and with no way of getting back out the tunnels. And as you guessed it, another marriage soon followed there. And one couple talk about having a engagement party in the tunnels, which they assume was a great event because everyone can remember attending, but no one can actually remember leaving. I could tell you so many amazing stories and it's worthy of a film, but you'll have to come and visit us to hear the rest. But these kids really worked hard to protect the tunnels, and they were unwilling to give any opportunity away to not do everything they could. They set up trips, they raised funds, they built partnerships, and they created a team dynamic, which I can tell you still holds today, because a lot of those anarchistic teenagers are still members of my board. They're members, and they're also volunteers, and they're still passionate about the site, and they're still as anarchistic as they ever were as well. They arranged protest cruises in conjunction with canal and river, in conjunction with inland waterways, to try and make sure that canals stayed in use. So many dirty tactics, including the breaking of lock paddles, pouring of cement into the water around the canal boats, and being threatened with lawsuits. But they were really pleased because the Battle of Stourbridge Canal ended up on the front page of the Times. So if anyone wants a good read, you really need to look at that. And they did manage to make big changes. Unfortunately for them, they did see that there was an end in sight. British Rail, who now owned the canals and waterways, had decided that they needed to close the tunnel and infill it so they could build a new freight line above the tunnel. Thinking that this was a battle too far, the anarchistic teenagers sadly organised a protest cruise, a last chance cruise for people to come and see the tunnels. And over 14,000 people came in the space of the week to do this trip. And one person in particular was Dr. John Fletcher. He loved the tunnels, he loved the spirit of the lads, and he really could see the importance. So he urged them to go for one last battle, but not as a group of kids, as an organised preservation trust. He offered to be its president, Vic Smallshire become its chairman, and the kids became members. And this is what they did. They organised themselves into a membership. They started looking at the commercial operations and looking at developments. And they went to British Rail and they put forward a proposal to build a viaduct rather than infilling the tunnel. They'd worked out that this would cost about £3,000 more. And so they decided that they would raise the money and give that money to British Rail, who, believing that the kids would never be able to achieve it, agreed. Now, it took 2.5 years of incredible hard work and every kind of fundraising you can imagine, but they got to the point when the money was raised. They were far more formal, far more organised, and they really were starting to get a lot of support, including the new Lord Ward at the time. But then a miracle happened. Just at the point that they were going to approach British Rail and turn over the money, Lord Beeching stepped in and not only closed down the idea of the freight railway, he closed the railways, and the tunnel no longer was under threat. In addition, British Waterways changes in legislation saw that they no longer had the cost of keeping the canals open, and they actually went overnight from being our biggest enemy to one of our biggest allies. I'm going to really shoot through the rest because I realise I'm very close on time now. The money was put forward as a licence. An agreement was put in place with British Waterways, or Canal and River Trust as they're now known, and the local council. And Dudley Canal Trust became the guardians and the site operators for the tunnels. We licensed it. We took on the work of clearing it out, clearing the mud, digging out canal arms, including the one that goes into the Black Country Arm, building new tunnels. We built new tunnels in 1984 and 1989, and you won't be surprised to hear that we named them the 84 tunnel and the 89 tunnel, because again, we're still being very creative. And for us, luckily, we were able to turn the site around and able to formally open it to visitors. We started most of the work in 1968, and it did sadly take about 5 years to do it. But thankfully, in 1973, the trip-in offer was officially declared open, and thousands upon thousands of people again showed their support by coming to see us. And it's at this point Vic Smallshire penned the mantra that is still with us today: the Dudley Canal Tunnel, closed by the government on behalf of the people, reopened by the people on behalf of themselves. We began employing staff to take escorted trips into the tunnels, initially doing legging, but that got very difficult. So we built the first electric powered narrowboat in the world, Electra. She's still running today. As I said, we built new tunnels, and in 1972, we'd invested over £3.5 million in the tunnels and the systems. In 2016, we knew that our model, which had been very successful for us, needed to ramp up. And so we set about fundraising to build what's now called the Portal Building, a brand new entrance complex for us with education and learning facilities, commercial outputs, and also put new sound and light shows into the canals. And at this time, we took a real culture change. We moved away from our Canal Society membership and preservation approach, though that ethos is still incredibly strong and part of our DNA. And we recognise ourselves now as a heritage attraction and charitable trust. And it's at this point that I joined the organisation. We don't want to move away from what was important about us, but we have to operate in today's world with today's visitors. So getting visitors in, having a great day, and then learning something is our main approach. But what's next for us? Well, after COVID, we're looking forward to properly reopening. We need to review our business model for sustainability. Attractions are having to fight harder and harder all the time for their visitors. So we need to look at a more robust short-term trading. We desperately want to find our next band of anarchistic teenagers who will help us go forward with the next levels of our journey. We really want to leverage the UNESCO Geopark status and everything that will bring, because we know how important and how unique the whole area is, and how all the attractions and all the wider region tie into that. We really want to find the funding for a feasibility study to open up Wren's Nest Tunnel. And we want to improve our care and conservation of the tunnels, caverns and waterways. And the way we've been doing this is actually by doing some funded work with Historic England on 3D scanning the tunnels. I can't show you too much at the moment because it is still very much a project in operation, but please invite me back and let me come and talk to you about what we found out about it, because it has been fascinating, and already the rewards from just the pilot and the first level of study that we've done has shown us so much. But the best thing you can do is come and visit us.
Oh, we're going through the tunnel. Push, boys, push. We're saving this old tunnel. Push, boys, push. It's the pride of Dudley Town, and they're trying to close it down. So push, boys, push. Oh, push, boys, push. We'll go through Castle Mill. Push, boys, push. Cathedral Arch as well. Push, boys, push. There's no more fresh air smell when we pass by the well. So push, boys, push. Oh, push, boys, push. The boat's been going through. Push, boys, push. Since 1792. Push, boys, push. It's a crime and it's a shame if we cannot do the same. So push, boys, push. Oh, push, boys, push. Don't let your strength to fail. Push, boys, push. 'Cause we're coming to the jail. Push, boys, out it is to walk.
Okay, hopefully I've stopped sharing there. The song